Welcome to this hour of Cyberpower of Tigray. Good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be joining us from. My name is Helena Tandesa, and very much welcome to this hour of power, Cyberpower of Tigray, where we speak on wellness in time of crisis. As you know, I've been away for quite some time. I've been focusing on advocacy for our people in Tigray, in Sudan, and around that are currently dealing with the ongoing Tigray genocide. Today, I have the distinct honor of having with me Father Aaron Warwick, who has just been so kind in giving us his time, and I'm going to say has dedicated or committed to more time to come in helping us in the Tigrayan community understand what the walk in faith and spirituality looks like or can look like while dealing with such egregious atrocities and heartbreaking pain. Father Warwick, I will just give you a moment to introduce yourself, and then we can get to it.
Well, thank you, Helena. It's an honor to be here on your show, and I appreciate the work that you're doing. I'm a priest in the Antiochian Orthodox Christian Archdiocese of North America. I serve in Wichita, Kansas at the parish of St. Mary. I've been here now for 12 years. And during my time serving as a priest, we've had several Ethiopian families that have been part of our parish. There are quite a few Ethiopians that attend Antiochian Orthodox churches throughout North America. And the Ethiopian people and culture is something that has become near and dear to my heart. Especially enjoy the food that you guys do it right there with the food and the hospitality. And so Helena asked me to come on and speak a little bit, like she said, about wellness in time of crisis, and look forward to anything that I can, possibly add that would be beneficial to people who are going through this crisis right now or have close family that are going through this crisis.
Thank you so much. Father Warwick also has a very wonderful podcast called Teach Me Thy Statutes. Doing a little research for our conversation today, I have to say I'm completely hooked and have been listening to it. You have a very soothing voice that you use to really disseminate the information that I must believe it must be your life's work. So I found it very comforting.
Thank you.
Indirectly has spoken to everything that I'm looking forward to sharing with our community today. So, Father, in understanding what's going on in our community, like I mentioned earlier, the genocide, the mass arrests that are currently taking place, the daily deaths that we are seeing and understanding within your work, what are some immediate things that might have come up in your mind? My wonderful team member at HPN, Dr. Simha, who's a psychologist, actually teamed me up with Father Aaron, and I'm so indebted to her. And I just wonder, as she told you about what's happening in her community, to her family, what are some thoughts that you might have had?
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, the first thing is just, it's really sad. I mean, that's the first thing that comes to mind. Not that it's better when it's, different religions involved or Christians versus non-Christians, but it's especially disconcerting and sad when you have a situation like this where Christians are fighting Christians. People that are of the same faith, we should be, sitting down at the same table and sharing fellowship together, not fighting each other. So that's the first thing, is just extremely sad. And then I think, like especially you mentioned Dr. Semhal. I mean, the fact that you're here, she's here in America, you're not there. There's a lot of time what people call survivor's guilt that people have. And so, just the fact that, you're removed from that situation, some of you, and out of harm's way, immediate harm's way. But then you have to worry about family members and people that back in Ethiopia who are in harm's way. And so there can be that feeling of guilt that people have when they're not actually in the middle of the of the fighting and of the crisis itself. Those were my initial thoughts.
You're absolutely right. It's one thing to be present and to know what's going on, but as you know, because of the complete communications blackout from the very beginning of this genocide, a lot of us are left to our own imagination, which sometimes could be a lot worse than understanding what's actually happening.
Yes.
As we talked about this conversation, one of the prominent questions I felt I had to ask for our community is, as an Orthodox Christian, as a person of faith, as a person of religion, during times of crisis, what are we thinking? And I think it's safe to say, because we're human beings walking in this, world, there's a commonality, right? So even for the most devout, our mind, as I mentioned, tends to go to the worst places. And for most of us, I dare say, keeping God in the moment, in the present time, when you're seeing such atrocious act, is not accessible. When you're finding your mind going to these deep, through these deep swells, how do we navigate our minds, kind of shepherd our minds to where we want it to be, which is ultimately God?
Right.
What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah. So, what I find in these types of situations, I mean, whatever crisis we're in, honestly, whether it's something this massive or whether it's just a personal crisis that we're facing. But the most common question I get is why? Why does God allow these kind of things? Why did God allow this or that to happen? And I mean, of course, when you're speaking about a situation like war and civil war, I mean, we can answer that question, in sort of an abstract way, that human sin is obviously involved in that. But, why does God allow these things to happen? Why doesn't he step in and intervene in all of this? And what I really try to do is, and I think this is really based upon biblical teaching, the why question is really beyond anything that we can answer. You and I can't answer why this is happening, why God allows these things to happen. And so what I try to help people do is to reframe their mind and retrain their mind, how they think. Because what the Bible deals with primarily is the question of what. And when I say that, I mean, what can I do? So given that this is happening, given that there is this crisis, again, whether it's something as large as a civil war, or if it's just something going on in your personal life, what can I do? What can I do now? Because that question is answerable. And if we focus on that, then it allows us again to retrain and reframe our minds. And we can see, if we just ask the why, we sit back and there's nothing that we do because we can't answer that question. But when we answer the what question, when we ask the what question, we realize there are things that we can do. I believe you're on mute, Helena.
Thank you.
Yeah, there you go.
And Father, you're absolutely right. The why question is what's most prevalent. I have to say, even for those of us who are not used to asking, oh, why God, why have you forsaken me or forsaken my family?
Right.
When something to this extent happens, I have to say a lot of us have found ourselves in that position. And
Sure.
It does feel selfish at the same time. You're not crying for yourself, you're crying for your community, for your family members. And at the same time, it feels selfish to say these words, why me? So as we talked about this question, you and I, we kind of were touching on the point that it also takes you away from the present time. The why, it's such an invalidating, and in terms of psychology, I would say it puts ourselves in that victim role, even though
Yes.
feeling of being present and in the now, so that we're able to completely process the trauma.
Yeah, I'm
Sorry, you kind of went out for a
yeah, I
second.
kind of
Can you
cut
hear
out.
me?
Yeah, what was the final part? I missed the.
So it's okay. I was just saying that it does take us out of the present moment when we
Right.
ask that why, and it can possibly help us sink into not a so great place, and for a lot of us, depression and things of that nature.
Right. Yeah, and when you ask, like I said, when you start to ask the what question, there's always something you can do. It may be small things. I mean, it may even just be that you stop and say a prayer. But a lot of times there's bigger things. I mean, you're doing this with your platform, and going out and advocating for people. I know there's charitable organizations and so forth that we can support. People can write, again, on the advocacy front. You can write your local legislator. You can call, when communication allows, you can call, email, your relatives. There's just so many things that people can do when they ask the what question. As you said, or sort of alluded to, it's enabling, versus disabling when we start asking the why. And it does help us focus on the present, which is where, we need to try to be focused. We ask the why, we can get off in all sorts of directions.
Absolutely right. Father, I have to ask this question. We're seeing pictures right now that are coming out of the country where the killers are wearing crosses, symbols of Christ himself, and posing with the mutilated bodies, uh, holding
Mhm.
crosses. And that really, it really pierces at you and to your spirituality. And as you're asking God why, there's these images. Could you speak on that a bit?
Yeah, again, it's so sad. It's a perversion of the cross. I mean, the cross, obviously it was bloody and gory, but in the sense that it was Jesus pouring out his life voluntarily for our salvation. And so the cross was never meant to be used. We see Jesus, for example, in the New Testament, when Peter was upset that Jesus was being arrested, he cut off the ear of one of the soldiers, and Jesus healed it and restored it. So the cross should always be a symbol of peace and not a symbol of violence. And that, I'm glad you bring this up, because it's one of the things that I think we need to recognize is that Jesus himself was primarily, we hear in the Gospels, was up against the religious people of his time who were misusing Judaism. And so, this was at the core of what's going on in Scripture, what's going on in the New Testament, especially, is that Jesus confronting people who were misusing the religion. And so we need to make sure that we always are a good image of that religion ourselves as much as possible, but also to recognize that people will pervert that, and that's nothing new. Again, it was the same struggle that Jesus was up against. And I think one of the things, kind of tying these two things together, we've been talking about the image of the cross being misused and the what we can do. One of the things that I want to highlight is the fact that, and I think a lot of Christians don't recognize this, but one of the main themes that runs throughout the gospel about Jesus as the Messiah, you see, the Jews of his time were looking for a Messiah who would be a military leader, because they were under the Roman occupation. Jerusalem was under Roman occupation. And Jesus came as a peaceful Messiah. And instead of fighting off the Romans by the sword, as I said, he healed, Malchus was his name, he healed his ear. So instead of fighting with the sword, Jesus said, there's a better way, there's a different way. And that is to make peace with your enemy, and not just to make peace, but to bring your enemy in, to sit at the same table of fellowship with them. And that's why his ministry and the ministry of the apostles after him went out to what we refer to as the Gentiles, to the non-Jews, to the Romans, and made peace with them and said, we want to bring you in to this covenant community. And so ultimately what Jesus did then, through the cross, through that image that we see being misused, what Jesus did is he said, I'm going to stop this cycle of violence. And so when we ask ourselves, what can we do? One of the things that we can answer that with in a time like this is not to repay evil with evil. And that's why Jesus taught us, to love our enemy, to pray for our enemy, to try to make them your friend, to try to sit at the same table of fellowship with them. And that's especially true, for those that are here in the U.S. or elsewhere that are out of harm's way. I was talking to somebody earlier today, actually, that talked about how from the previous Civil War, there's some people in the U.S. They were their sides were opposite sides in the previous Civil War, but they've become friends. And that's part of what we can do is to break this cycle of violence, is to learn to befriend our enemy, who other people tell us should be our enemy. And that's the true meaning of the cross and how the cross should be used. We can't help how other people, obviously it's bothersome, but we can't help how they use it. But we have to make sure that we use it appropriately, and just recognize that, Jesus was up against the same thing. People were misusing the faith, even against him.
Absolutely right. In terms of, perversion of the cross, I think about Christ's foreshadowing of, or this atrocity, this genocide. I think about Christ's foreshadowing of false disciples. I think about this prime minister likening himself to Christ. Just this week, there was footage that came out where just this week, the prime minister's at a dinner and he says, Christ was in the boat and he was asked, as if he wasn't in the boat, don't you care if we drown? I am letting you know that I, like Christ, am in the boat with you. So this sort of propaganda rhetoric, and with what we mentioned, the cross over the fallen, not even soldiers, but civilians, mutilated bodies, things of that nature. I constantly think about, no, you will not take my God from me. I will not allow you to try and to keep me away from my spirituality. It almost feels like part of the constant, there's advocacy for our people, and also with things like wellness and mental health. And I now am understanding spirituality and religion. We also have to be advocates for ourselves and our community so that we continue to be this strong spiritual community, and that along with our land and whatever else they're trying to take away from us, they're not allowed to take away our Christ, our spirituality, our religion, because that's also the type of warfare, right? Like you said, it's the same religion, but it's a mental warfare. It's also a spiritual warfare in that you can feel that you are less in communion with God than you were before this, which leads me to my next of my possible 20 rapid fire questions to you. At least I hope it doesn't feel like that.
No, not at all.
So I think about my personal experience. Like I mentioned to you, God and I are on a day-to-day, minute-to-minute speaking terms. I'm just, he may possibly mute me sometimes because he's like, let me get more people. But, when you feel so close to God and then something like this happens, I have to be honest in saying there was a short amount of time where I felt I couldn't speak to God the way I normally and frequently did. I know without a doubt that God is so much bigger than these wars and genocides and things of that nature. I know for a fact. And so much bigger than these experiences, the grudges we may have personally, or because I mentioned to you, we're petulant children, right? In times like that, what are some ways that we can accept where we are? Okay, I'm not able to talk to God as freely as I want or have. What are some ways we can navigate through that time where we're feeling, less communicative with God, less, not as close to God? And is this normal?
Oh yeah, I mean it's absolutely normal, and I mean we, in the readings of the church fathers and the saints throughout the history of our churches, they talk about this extensively. So it's very normal for us to have these types of situations, and I think the biggest thing for me is, that I've learned over the years as it relates to this is, not to be overly concerned with it. We're going to have times like that. And to recognize, I think, too, that I truly believe, that God understands that. He understands that we're weak. He understands that there's times that we're going to have problems. But ultimately realizing that he is there for us. He's always there for us when we come back. And you have this in multiple stories. The one that I think about, off the top of my head is the parable of the prodigal son, an extreme case. So God is always there to welcome us back. So that's just one of the things that I keep in mind in these types of situations is that God is bigger than me, and we think about, I know you're a parent. I'm a parent. I'm sure many people that are listening are parents, and those that aren't can probably relate. But, a good parent is the same way. Like no matter what your child does, you're always there. And this is why the Bible talks about God as a father, God as a parent. And so we know our kids disappoint us sometimes. They do. They don't want us around sometimes, but when they need us, we're there for them, and we make the time. So that's the first thing that I would say. And then the second thing, I kind of like what you mentioned there about how, maybe God needs to put you on mute and there's other people that have. And I think we need to realize, we're not the center of the universe, because that is a childish way of thinking. And ultimately, God wants us to grow up and become an adult. St. Paul talks about this. The apostle talks about this, that when he was a child, he spoke like a child. He behaved like a child when he became an adult. And so this is a good time for us to remember when we're in these situations where we don't feel so close to God. It is for us to remember that we need to grow up. We need to realize we're not the center of the universe. Things, there's other things going on in the world. And again, we get back to that question, then what can I do? And ultimately for me, like getting out of those funks, I would call it, where I'm, in those positions, is get back to doing the work of God. And that's ultimately what sets your heart back on fire. And the work of God, in our church, we just had the reading today, the parable of the Good Samaritan, where the Samaritan, who was a heretic, was not accepted by the Jews. The priest and the Levite passed this guy on the road who's been beaten up near death. But this Samaritan, this heretic, stops by. He takes care of him. He shows mercy. And Jesus says, who was the neighbor? Who acted like the neighbor in this parable, as we're supposed to do? And of course, the answer was this heretic, the Samaritan. And so getting back, in our lives, getting back to, okay, maybe I don't feel close to God. Okay, but the Bible, and faith, it's not about how you feel. It's about how you behave. Mm-hmm. And, what I have found in every situation as I've gotten older in life and have more experience, talk to more people, the way that we behave then impacts the way that we feel. And when I behave, even though I might not feel like loving my wife, we get in an argument. When I start showing that, when I start doing that, then all of a sudden those feelings of love, I start to remember, all the good things that happen in our marriage. And then those feelings of love come back. And so when we find ourselves far from God, feeling far from God, start behaving the way that he told us to do. Start trying to be a good neighbor. Start showing mercy upon your enemy, upon those around you. And all of a sudden, you start to feel that closeness to God again, because you're doing his will.
It's beautifully said. And when it comes to our community, I think about, because so many of us are currently unable to think of anything outside of advocacy, which looks
Sure.
like you mentioned, um, calling our representatives, checking on our families and communities at large, back home in whatever ways are available to us right now. What you just said translates to me as, even though I'm not speaking to God right this moment the way I was before the genocide, knowing that God continues to show up for me and for the world, for my community, for those that I love, that I don't know what's going on with. It means trusting that gut instinct to do godly work, like showing up to the protests to advocate for them, or if I do have the money, then participating in fundraisers to help
Right.
the community, or in my immediate communities, if there
Well,
is
yeah.
some.
See, I think that's something we should stress as well. So, I mean, the reality is, right, that you and I, there's not much we can do. I mean, even if we were to fly over to Ethiopia and be allowed in, how much am I going to be able to do there? So, not to say that you just ignore it, you quit praying for them, you don't, we should still do all those things, advocate, send money. But what you can do is you can be kind to your neighbor. You can be kind to the people that you come across that are struggling throughout the day. And so I think you kind of touched on this when you started opening in your remarks. But those are things we can do, and those make a difference.
They do. They
So
do.
look at the things that we can change. And wars don't start. If everyone did this, if everyone lived this way, there would never be a war anywhere,
That's right.
because we would all be trying to take care of others and make sure that which is what we're supposed to do, which is being made in the image of God, as we hear about in the book of Genesis. It means to make God present, to show forth his image. And we do that by living his will. And, unfortunately, like I said, we can't go over to Ethiopia right now and do that. But we can do it in our local communities, as you even touched on. So don't overlook that either. I think one of the things that we have a tendency to do in these types of situations, like you said, is it's very hard to get, especially for those of you who are so close to people there. It's hard to get that out of your mind. It's hard to, but that cripples us, and it can stop us from doing God's will in our own community right here, right now, and that's just as important for us to do.
Absolutely. Because of that inevitable interconnectedness of the human experience, human
Right.
beings, what we're doing here is connected with everything that's happening and all the good that we essentially want to happen.
Right.
So that's
And you're also, in doing that, I mean, I mean, the Bible talks about this constantly, especially the New Testament talks about table fellowship, sitting down at the same table. And you think about, the Ethiopian community understands this, sitting down at table together. It's more than just eating. Unfortunately, in America today, a lot of us, it's just fast food. We go through the drive-through, and it's just a biological thing to keep you alive. But in the Ethiopian community, in the biblical community, it was something much more than that. And when you do that with people here in America, obviously a lot of them are going to be not Ethiopian. But one of the things that you can do, and that is a natural sort of outflow from that, is that people that weren't aware of what's going on there start to become aware of it. And that in of itself does work and can benefit, the Ethiopian community as well. I mean, I've seen this a lot. I've talked a lot about Israel-Palestine with people here in America, and they don't understand what's going on the ground there. They just understand what they see, maybe a few things on the news when things erupt. And so you, even in doing that, you educate people. They often become advocates. They often provide ways to help people. So, that, like you said, there's that interconnectedness. And if we're doing everything that we can to try to do God's will in our daily lives, in the situation that we're in right now, you never know the seed that gets planted, how that's going to sprout and what that's going to do.
absolutely. Absolutely. I'm looking at some of the comments, and mostly a big thank you to you, Father Aaron, for taking the time to address this. And just knowing again that you're within our faith community, there is a big sense of feeling seen and being understood from those outside of the community, but still within, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Um, there's one question that perfectly segues into my next topic that I'd like to um, to, to really put out there, which is uh, those whom we considered friends. Right now,
Mhm.
we're talking about Ethiopia, and of course,
Yeah.
Tigray being of the northern region. Um, in the Western world and beyond, we're used to more so talking about black and white or racial tensions or racial
Yeah.
discrimination. But this, I mean, we're essentially, this week, most of us thought we were the same people and we were being discriminated against because of our ethnicity. So
Right.
this could be a man. North Star Tigray asks very eloquently, how can we separate ourselves from those who are silent during genocide, from those who can't even stand up to the faith that we are sharing together, or differently put, those who are also gaslighting us and pretending like this is not even happening? As Christians, how do we deal with this sort of, uh, you know, ghastly behavior?
Right. Right. Yeah, it's difficult. I had a professor, Dr. Albert Rossi, at seminary, and he had a saying that I found extremely helpful in my ministry and in my daily life, and it's just two words that are repeated: hurt people, hurt people. And if you think about it, pretty much any situation that you see when someone hurts someone else, it's because they've been hurt themselves. Um,
Absolutely.
and so that's kind of what I was getting at earlier as well, about when we talk about the true meaning of the cross, which is that Jesus stops this cycle. He stops this cycle of hurt people hurting people. Um, Now, so how do we do this practically, in this type of situation? And how do we do it practically as people that can be weak ourselves? Okay, so what the first thing is that I would say is that, you know, even if this person becomes intolerable, um, we should try to always avoid hurting them. There are times that just because of our human weakness or because of others, going overboard on things, that we have to take a break from a relationship, or take some, time off from that. Just think of extreme examples, right? I mean, I think about, and this unfortunately has happened, I know, as part of this genocide, but someone is raped. Okay. Like, I'm not going to tell them, you got to go back and have a relationship with the person that raped you, right? That's just not going to happen. That's not reasonable. Okay. So there are extreme scenarios like this, but you don't have to hurt them back. And I think what we find when, I'd like to talk about it in terms of power. Okay. When someone victimizes us in any way, shape, or form, if we decide to hurt them back, we decide to react to that, um, we're giving them power over us. The way that we're in power is by saying, you know what, I'm not going to react to you. I'm just going to act the way that I've been taught by God to act, the way that I'm supposed to behave. And then I'm in control of the situation. I'm not letting you be in control, because if we react to people, we're allowing them to be in control of the situation. And even if we ignore them, if we're talking about them behind their back and gossiping about them and so forth, and letting the way that they behave make us feel certain ways, we're letting them have control. We're letting them have power in that relationship. And this ultimately, when we look at the history of the martyrs in our church who were persecuted and ultimately died, um, that's what really irked the authorities that were killing, is they could never have power over them. They said, I don't care what you're going to do. I'm not going to react. And they would start torturing him. And no, I still love you. I mean, you think of Jesus on the cross, many of the martyrs that followed after him. God forgive them, for they know not what they do. He wouldn't react in a negative way. He never gave them power. The martyrs never gave the people who are victimizing them power. So they never hurt back. And so even if we have to, sever relationships, whether it be for a time or whether it be permanently, depending on the circumstances, we don't have to hurt them back. We don't have to gossip about them. We don't have to say negative things about them. We don't have to let them control how we feel. We say, you know what? I don't know what's going on there. And this is where I find, the scriptural injunction not to be judgmental. Mm-hmm. And this idea of hurt people. You know what? They're probably hurting. And some people, in these situations, let's just say on the other side, of things, maybe they're not speaking out, maybe they're not recognizing it or whatever. It's probably because they're hurt and they don't understand how to process, and they don't want to think that people on my side, quote, could really be doing this. How they probably asking the same questions that you are. How could they do this? And so they deny it. And so I just find this to be the most helpful ways to deal with these types of situations. We can only control ourselves. Half the time, we're not even good at that, right? So we can't,
Absolutely.
but we can't control others. But we can be in control of ourselves. We can maintain that power over our own will and over our own actions. And so that would be my focus in these situations.
I agree. It definitely takes away from our power and whatever semblance of control that we may think we have when we allow these people who obviously are either, like you said, hurt and so are lashing out, or may just not be as good of friends as we may have hoped. But to lash back out is taking that control away from us.
Right.
And I definitely agree. It's about, like you said, maybe removing yourself. Why stay in something that you're not finding reciprocity within, and just guaranteeing yourself to continue to be hurt and possibly push you towards acting in an ungodly way,
Right.
unchristian way, or however one may phrase that. So I completely agree, and that's actually a really great point. I never thought of it that way. You're right. No matter what quote unquote side you're on, no matter what pain you're going through, because it's so personal and it's your own, it will always feel like the entire world should, react to, succumb to this personal pain. That personal pain will always just be this magnanimous because we're feeling it inwardly. It's informing our way of being physically, mentally, all of these different ways. But to now understand that that person is also going through a mirror version of that.
Right.
Whatever information that they have, thinking their version is the truth. And for us, seeing it plastered all over the news and
Right.
Forget the news, and having firsthand accounts of what's happening, these sides are, just very, just the idea of sides can be completely toxic. So that's an excellent point.
Well, and as you're aware, we're going through this in the U.S. as well. I mean, not to the degree of genocide, but there's a lot of division right now in the United States, and honestly, it's going on throughout the world. So there, and I think what I was just talking to someone about this the other day. I mean, everybody wants to choose a side or pick a side, and the sides just, they play off of each other. And so, one side says one thing, well, the other's going to try to counter that, and they just bounce back and forth. If you actually sit down and talk with people, and a lot of times you can find common ground, at least in some areas. And so, they may have different perceptions of things than you do because they have different sources or because they are more influenced by a certain side. But when you sit down and have table fellowship, when you have a relationship, when you talk about things and assume the best about others and be kind to them, even if they have said things that are hurtful to you, you often find that there is more common ground than you realize. And they often find that as well. And that can help further their own, the way that they see the situation, the way that they see you as the other side. Well, maybe this other side's not what I thought it was, So I think this is important, on a broader scale, it's important within your Ethiopian community, but it's important even on a broader scale for us as human beings as well, because the more that the less that we see ourselves as being on a side, and the more that we see ourselves just trying to live a good Christian life, trying to help others, trying to understand where others are coming from, trying to build them up and establish relationships with them, the better off all of humanity is for it.
I do pray that there will come a time when we are able to, talk and really try to understand what happened there. For my community right now, I know we're in a place of such hurt and active, just active, visceral participation in stopping what's happening.
Right.
But I think getting to even removing ourselves from these toxic, possible toxic relationships, um, and being a representation of the possibility of Christ-like behavior amidst this type of atrocity could be a win, if that makes
Right.
sense.
Yeah.
Because you know what I mean? I know at the very beginning, there was a lot of sitting down. I mean, for the people that
Sure.
I immediately know, and even as groups, we'd reached out and said, this can be stopped people to people, because there's what government does. And a lot of times it could be self-serving. It could be
Right.
a bigger idea of what they feel the country should go through. So understanding that this prime minister had intentions that had been rearing their heads through really negative actions throughout the last years,
Mm-hmm.
with the down talking on our community, the dehumanization, cancers. I mean, he would openly call our people, all of these, everything that we have read about in history books, Rwanda and the Holocaust, just your genocide manual book, if you will.
Yeah.
So it was very ominous for those people who were into politics or just had the pulse, to the ground. So in understanding that people-to-people conversations could potentially stop this, and then seeing this backlash of the opposite of what you would hope.
Right.
I think that's currently pushed our community right now to feel like, you know what, all I can do right now is stay in the space to try to save as many lives as possible, try to reconnect Tigray, as I mentioned earlier, because it's completely disconnected and currently at, besieged. It's completely encircled, so that no humanitarian aid, just
Right.
seeing someone be so awful as a human being,
Right.
so, with pictures coming out from humanitarian aid agencies and organizations like Doctors Without Borders saying there's an active famine happening. And
Mm.
yet this one person just calculating and, all the things that would just make you so emotional and wonder, why would someone be
Right.
so awful as a human being? So, everything that you said, I pray that there will be a time, and we've seen from Rwanda, a time of reconciliation, a time of hashing it out. All of that hopefully is inevitable. But right now, my takeaway from what you've shared is, do what's necessary to safeguard your faith and how that God wants to be for you to be in this time, uh, which is as Christ-like as possible, as as we've grown up to be. Whether it's just communicating, I can't be around this right now. If that's the kindest thing we could do right now, saying, I wish you well,
Yeah.
but I can't be around this, or sharing the pain. This is how you've made me feel,
Right.
and so I can't be around you. I choose not to be around you. So, but you're right. This back and forth sides, this letting someone usurp your energy or allowing your energy to go towards something that's so.
Right.
It's not where we want to be as a community, and I really hope we heard those words that Father Aaron has shared. We talked about meditation, what can meditation look like for a Christian, for a person that is not of the, because when I think when we think meditation, we think of Eastern philosophy, right?
Mhm.
But there's so much in between. Can you share with us your your version of meditation, or how you feel we could use meditation and prayer?
Yeah, I think, when we talked about this earlier, one of the things that I try to stress with people is that in our tradition, prayer, meditation, is not so much always just talking to God. I mean, we do that during the services, uh, and we do that during certain times when we pray at home. But also part of that should be what I would call listening to God or listening for God. So, in other words, not talking, just being silent, just taking time to be silent, and try to center ourselves, I guess you would say, and focus on being, because there's so many things in life now, especially with the internet, the way that, especially in the U.S., the way that the jobs can be, and traveling here and there, and taking kids to events, and we just get caught up in so many other things that draw us in one direction or another, and we're worried about what we've got to do next and what we should have done last, and all of these things. So to take time to actually quiet ourselves and just as I say, listen for God. And it doesn't mean that I don't mean by that, that God's going to speak to us audibly, but uh, to be present where we are at that time. And this helps us, I think, get to the issue that I had talked about, which is, that we would hear the what can we do here, now, in the present. And so that's my focus when I talk to people about prayer and meditation.
I agree. Uh, I think about the Lord's Prayer and how Christ said, I don't know who it was, but someone asked, teach us how to pray. And when Christ imparted this, this way to pray, it, I feel, and this is just a personal thought, that throughout the entire day, as long as I'm awake, it's an opportunity to talk to God, and that could be considered prayer, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because God is omnipresent, and there's nothing you're hiding from God.
Right.
And with free will that God has bestowed upon us, and allowing us to just be who we are and how we are, and yet always continuing to bestow His grace upon us, and a lot of times grab us from that cliff,
Mm-hmm.
whether it's that that whatever that proverbial cliff is. Meditation is a moment to purposely sit and be silent, to receive the answers, whatever we call it, to those prayers, to those conversations that we've had throughout the day. And I think the art could be in the listening, because since we know God already knows our heart, within that active listening, or that moment of
Right.
quietness, that meditation allows
Yes.
the answers that we seek. I mean, God's always talking to us. So you're right, to have that moment of purposeful silence to take in what God is imparting,
Right.
it is a gift into itself. So
Mm-hmm.
definitely. I want to let our viewers know that there, there are so many topics that we want to get into when it comes to spirituality and navigating this current time. I'm most so very proud of our community and the strides we've made in terms of um, health, mental health specifically. We're so open to understanding and gaining more information, and also advocating for ourselves and our community uh, for that for that space of mental health. One thing, a really good new friend in the community uh, requested was that that I ask you, Father, about mental health uh, specifically, and I want to get this right because I know that this is something that many of us are wanting to get into. So she mentions, can you please ask the Father about mental health and religion? Like, how can we deal with mental illness as a religious community? So I've asked the Father to just touch upon it, and it's hard to do because it's such a vast conversation that deserves to be had. But I want to honor our sister here who's made the direct
Mhm.
request, and I want to honor our people that are wondering the same thing. And I want to let you know we're going to continue this series within a series of conversation of spirituality in this kind of crisis. But Father, is there something that you could just kind of impart um, about this very big topic?
Yeah, I think the first thing, just to sort of set the tone for it, is to recognize that mental health issues are real. Um, and there are a lot of people that it seems, particularly religious people, that either explicitly or implicitly deny that. And they view mental health as um, they view mental health as something of just a spiritual problem, something that you can pray away. The reality is, and we know this very well now through science and modern technology, but we know that the brain is an organ. And this is, just like any other organ in our body, there can be problems with that. There can be issues with that are physical problems and not just spiritual problems. And by the way, um, this is no this is not to say that spirituality doesn't exist or that there's no, that some of the problems that we have are not spiritual. We're not saying that at all. But recognizing that there is a difference between spiritual health and mental health. So to me, that's the biggest thing, is recognition that it's real. There are physiological reasons most of the time why there are mental health issues, biological reasons, and that we should take that seriously. And the way that I like to talk about it, my wife also, who's in healthcare, the way that we like to talk about it, is if somebody has a broken leg, you don't expect them to be able to dunk a basketball. Okay, it's not going to happen. If somebody has something physiologically wrong with their brain chemistry, or even when things are, there's times of crisis and that you're in now that can throw things off, we shouldn't expect them to just overcome that. We shouldn't expect or we shouldn't think that it's wrong for them to seek out medical professional help. We don't, I mean, personally, I think it would be insane. I have a kid who broke his arm, when he was younger, right? I didn't just go and pray for him and pray over him and say, you're going to get better. I took him to the doctor. Do I pray for him? Yes, absolutely. Of course, I prayed for him as well. Asked that God would guide the doctor's hands and help him be restored to health. But I also took him to a doctor. And so, again, I view this the same way with mental health. Do I pray for people with mental health? Yes, absolutely. We pray for them. I also take them to a doctor because much like there can be a bone broken when you break your arm, there can be something in the brain that can be helped. And the final thing I'll say right now about that, Helene, unless you have further questions now, is that we should recognize that a lot of times we as pastors can't deal with some of the spiritual problems if we don't deal with the underlying physical problems. Our body, and this is something that the Orthodox, I think, understand better than anyone else. Our body, our soul, our spirit, they're all interconnected. And that's why we use our body so much in our worship. It's why we fast, because there's a connection between, as a human being, we're one human being. We're not like part body, part soul, or part spirit, whatever. These are all interconnected. And so I've definitely had situations where I've had people who they just couldn't progress in their spiritual life until they got help, professional help for mental health issues. I don't expect people that have broken leg to make a prostration. I mean, they got that you've got to get these things fixed before we can make the spiritual strides that we want people to make.
Excellent answer. I got two things out of that. One was indirectly. So one was that, first of all, admitting that mental illness is real to yourself. If there's someone in your household dealing with mental health issues, understanding that it's not, I think the go-to is Satan is in there, or Satan's doing this, or
Okay.
that sort of thing. But it's a real physiological thing that happens, that affects the body, that is informed by the brain. And so, like Father Aaron said, no matter how much work we could do, reading the Bible, fasting, all of our go-tos, if the mind isn't receiving it because of some issue, then it's sort of a moot point to try to push. And I think personally it goes against the teaching of Christ himself, because you're not trying to shove religion or spirituality down someone's throat. And so granting grace to whomever may be dealing with the mental illness, and like you would do with anything, like the analogy gave us, broken arm, broken leg, you would take that person to a professional that could help, and
Yes.
pray for that professional to be able to help. So let's love not only our neighbors and our the strangers that we come upon, but also let's grant grace and give love, active, proactive love to those who are in our homes. What is it? I don't think it's biblical, but I think they say charity starts at home. It could be. There's a lot of false quotes from the Bible, but I think we forget. We treat the stranger with such grace and honor. We forget that
Yes.
because those in our homes are always available and present. We may not respect them or look after them as much. So mental illness is real, and it's not about God loves you less or loves that person less. It's just there's everything possible under the sun where we live here on earth. So, and also the second thing I got from that, Father Aaron, was when you mentioned fasting. So that is also part of our, could be part of our meditation, right?
Yes, absolutely.
All these things that we akin to our orthodoxy or Orthodox Christianity. I think about fasting. I think about when we go to church, the incense, the holy oil, the holy water, just getting in this space of oneness. This, I keep coming back to this word, purposefully, just this
Right.
on purpose. We're doing it on purpose, setting time aside
Yep.
to listen to God on purpose, fasting, choosing to just eat enough to be satisfied, not to overindulge, on purpose and for a purpose. So I got that too. Before we go, I have to ask you about something that I absolutely fell in love with when I was listening to your wonderful podcast. I believe that can be found where all podcasts are available.
Yeah.
Is there a specific place that you find the
No,
podcast?
it's available in all the stores.
All the stores. Again, it's called Teach Me Thy Statutes. You say on grieving, we're having a lot of funerals, a lot of horrific news on how our family members have died, being made to die. So there's a lot of grieving in our community right now, and our grieving culturally is very heavy. It's very intense. Yeah. It spans days upon end where we're collectively grieving, and then after that we continue to wear the black. That signifies mourning time, but also is a constant reminder for us, personally, of our missing. In your podcast, you say godly grief versus worldly grief. Could you just give us a little summary on what that means?
Yeah, and somewhat related to that, though, I do want to comment also on what you just said about the way that your community grieves and mourns. So I think it's healthy, because the reality is we are human beings, and even though we profess the resurrection and we believe that we'll be resurrected and that we can be reunited with our loved ones in the Lord. The reality is we miss them. The reality is that we grieve when they're not here, and that's a healthy thing to do. So there needs to be a balance. It's okay to grieve, and what we were talking about in that episode is what you said about the difference between what the apostle calls worldly grief versus heavenly grief, and that is the biggest difference. There is a grief with hope. So when the world grieves, there's no hope of anything. There's anger, there's frustration, there's all of these negative things. But the Christian has hope. Number one, as I mentioned, in the resurrection, in the fact that someday we will be reunited. And then secondly, I think the Christian has a hope in godly grief would be has a hope that there can be something better than this. And that gets back to what we've been talking about the what we can do. What can I do? And when we grieve in that way, asking ourselves, what can I do to make this world a better place? What can I do in this situation? It provides us hope. We're not helpless. Again, we're not the victim. Yes, you're a victim in the sense that, a loved one was taken from you, but we're not allowing that to be our identity. When we allow that to be our identity, getting back to what we've been talking about, that takes the power away from you. And so the godly grief empowers you. It enables you by going out and doing God's will, that there can be hope. There can be something better in the future for you and for others.
That's beautiful. Again, Father Aaron's podcast is Teach Me Thy Statutes. And I wanted to give the opportunity for people who may want to pose questions for you for our near future conversations, to please just send them to helenanow@gmail.com. And as usual, that is where you can send me any questions or suggestions for future conversations. Before we say goodbye for now, I'm just going to skim through, make sure we're not missing any other comments. There's more. Thank you very much for your time, Father Aaron. And thank you. Spirit of time. That's right. Our wonderful sister says, yes, prayer is important too, but we seek medical attention when we need it in regards to mental illness. Our body, soul, and spirit are so intertwined. Right on. Father, how do you draw the line between spiritual and psychological depression when what's been happening is weighing you down to pray as before and do other things you did before? So I feel like we kind of touched upon that a little bit earlier, but Hannah might have just joined. So how do you draw the line between spiritual and psychological depression when you're unable to do things that you were doing before, like prayer and things of that nature? Do you feel?
Yeah. I mean, it's a tough. It's so individualized, and that's why we have pastoral relationships, but with people, and I try to advise them on an individual basis. But just in speaking generally, if a person had in any situation, because the other thing is that our brains change over time. They change as we age. They change based on certain situations. And so, if it's something that seems to be more situational, probably start by dealing with it. What we talked about earlier, Helena, by actually going back and how our feelings can change based upon our behavior. And so sometimes we sort of have to force ourselves to do certain things. And so help a person along to go out to try to spread God's mercy, to spread his love, to be a good neighbor. And after they've been doing that a while, if they still have, these same issues, then that's when I know, that it's time to perhaps, seek, consult someone that's familiar with medicine, the medicinal side of things, or even a professional counselor. I mean, even that can provide more than I'm able to. I'm not a professional counselor. If it's something that somebody's been struggling with more their whole life, things of that nature, we probably go that route sooner. But I try to keep in touch just as I do. I mean, I visit my parishioners. I visit them when they're in the hospital for any kind of physical illness. I keep in touch with them. I pray with them. I, try to help keep their spirits up, try to keep them doing well spiritually, but I do the same, so it's never a situation of, we just turn this over and, I'm not going to talk to you. I'm going to send you to a psychiatrist or something like that. We want to keep tabs on that as well. And like I said, the human being and our Orthodox understanding is so intertwined, interconnected, that we want to be working on all these things together. We need to really see it as a holistic process.
Beautifully said. I want to remind our viewers, as always, you're not alone, right? We know the bigger picture of things that is always with us, as we've talked about today, whether you're allowing God into your life right now or not, that is bigger. And so He can deal with our certain temperaments that might be coming up right now. What helped me get back to my full strength in faith is continuously saying out loud, God, I know you're bigger than this. I know you can handle this.
Yeah.
I know you'll give me this space. And indeed, there is no timeline or any type of judgment, although you're judging yourself harder. And I think the worse we judge ourselves, the longer it takes to reconnect with God. And what you're facing right now, it's real. And so don't wait for anyone else to validate that. Feel validated by God, and just know that God's always available for us, right? Just waiting on you. That doesn't mean He leaves us or that there is no abandonment there. So let's get back to it, because things certainly are always better with God by our sides. I just have to say that from my personal walk. Father Aaron, is there any closing remarks you'd like to make? I've just so immensely enjoyed our conversation, and you were worth the wait, let me tell you, because I was very nervous about having this conversation with anyone whose life work is not this. So you definitely were worth the wait, and I'll just let you say any
good. Yeah, you guys are in my prayers, and the stuff that we talked about, I think that it does work. These things help, but it's hard. It's easy to say some of the things that I said today, and to say that those are the things you should do. It's hard to put them into practice. And I think, Helena, what you said earlier, we tend to judge ourselves so harshly. Recognize you're going to make mistakes. There are going to be times that you're not as gracious to others as you hoped you would be. But, we can continue to work on that. We can continue to improve. We can seek out the forgiveness, ask the forgiveness of others. When we find ourselves falling short, we ask the forgiveness of God, and we extend that same mercy to them when they also make those mistakes. But ultimately, the things we talked about today are the things that I think as Christians, we need to strive to work towards in our own lives, living out the faith.
Amen. That's just perfectly said. We may fall short, but there's a redemption at the end of that. Mm-hmm. I want to remind everyone, for continued information on community events, please go to Tigray Events on Instagram. Our sister there continues to put up all of the protest informations, and also there's many just communal opportunities coming up, with a night of hope for women of Tigray Gala coming up, and Thanksgiving dinner of appreciation for the DMV area, and just things of that nature. Because with the holiday season coming up, we've talked about triggers in the past, in defining it and understanding that we could be triggered to have things like PTSD come up from past experiences, unresolved experiences, and things of that nature. And generally, holidays tend to be triggers for many of us, not just in our community, but all around the world. So I really pray that you spend time on purpose with family or those who you choose to be your family, extended friends, or even I used to love doing this when I was in high school, is going out and being of service. You can't imagine, if you've never done it before, how much it gives you to have the opportunity to give back. So if you know you're going to be kind of low and down on the dumps this coming holiday season, I implore you to find a way to give back, whether it's, we know there, I hope it doesn't sound cliche, but there's nothing cliche about charity, right? But we know them as soup kitchens or whatever it is. Churches also have ample opportunities for us to be of service, especially during the holidays. So
Yeah.
if we can't smile, let's help someone else smile, and I promise you, it'll bring a smile to your face. And having said that, and although I don't want to let you guys go, thank you. Thank you for your attention. And I pray whenever you need it, just go back. If you didn't catch the beginning of the program, go back and listen to it. Please look out for more information on upcoming conversations. And I'm very happy to be back with this Wellness in Time of Crisis series. I didn't go far. I want you to know I continue the work in advocacy, and as things are needed in different areas. For more information on how you can help advocate for Tigray, please write me on that email I've provided, helenanow@gmail.com. The biggest resource right now is omnatigray.org. Please check that out if you're an ally and wanting to help combat this ongoing genocide. Having said that, thank you again, Father Aaron, for
Thank you.
us with your time, and I look forward to having this conversation continue. And to our Cyber Power of Tigray community and our Tadarus, Tigray Tse'er, Tigray Tse'er. May God be with you, and have a wonderful evening.